Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. Gender apartheid was first articulated by Afghan human rights defenders and feminist allies in response to the subjugation of women and girls to systemic attacks on their rights under the Taliban in the 1990s. They were inspired by the international community's response to the situation of racial discrimination in South Africa, where in 1994 racial apartheid was recognised as a new crime against humanity. As the brutal and inhuman treatment of women under Afghani and Irani regimes has caught the world's attention and outrage, activists and campaigners are calling for gender apartheid to be included as a crime against humanity in a new UN treaty on the prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity. Today, I was joined by journalist, author and campaigner Robbyn Swan, lawyer and campaigner to end gender apartheid Mahbooba Faiz from Afghanistan, along with professor and long-time activist for women's rights in Iran, Mahya Ostovar, to discuss their campaign and the detail around the law and the importance of codifying gender apartheid as a crime against humanity under international law. So please listen to the detail and the examples that we discuss here and get behind the campaign. The speakers go into a lot of detail around the meaning of gender apartheid and the importance of really making sure that this stays on the table. The campaign is United Against Gender Apartheid, and please follow our show notes for more information. I hope you enjoy today's episode and please share widely. Hello everybody and welcome to today's episode of the Activist Lawyer Podcast. I am absolutely delighted to be joined in the studio today by three guests who have joined us from different parts of Ireland and travelled all the way here to the big smoke of Newry. So it's a delight to have you in the studio. Robbyn Swan, thank you for joining us. Mahya Ostovar and Mahbooba Faiz, thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome to Newry and to our studio.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us in your lovely studio.
No problem. Well, we've been in touch a little while. Some of you, we've been planning this podcast, but also I've been interested in something that you've all been working very hard on, and we're here to talk about that today. And it is a campaign around gender apartheid and the recognition of gender apartheid, which we covered on the podcast last year. But we're here today to talk about a particular campaign that you're all behind and to reach out to some of our listeners to see how they can get involved. But we're here to learn a little bit more about yourselves as well. And maybe, Robbyn, you might tell us about the campaign first and foremost and its title and where you're going with it.
Sure. We are part of a campaign to end gender apartheid. We use the hashtag United Against Gender Apartheid to attract others to our campaign. It is an international effort led from the front by women from Afghanistan and Iran who have experienced the extreme oppression of regimes that seek to eliminate women from public life. And the United Nations is currently considering the first international Crimes Against Humanity treaty, and it is our goal as campaigners to see the crime of gender apartheid, in other words, that process of erasing women, made a crime against humanity, and that is what we're campaigning on.
So it is a global campaign, and where did the campaign start? Because I know the term gender apartheid has been used beforehand. I think back in the 1990s there were some activists from Afghanistan who came up with the term, but really we're seeing an increase in the term now, I suppose because of regimes that are becoming more oppressive in Iran and of course in Afghanistan that we're seeing on the news. Mahbooba, I know you have had your own experience of first-hand experience of gender apartheid in your own journey before you came to Ireland from Afghanistan. Are you able to share a little bit about your journey and maybe give some examples of what we're talking about in terms of gender apartheid in Afghanistan in particular?
The gender apartheid term, which the women's rights activists and United Nations experts believe that this term should be included in international law, in Crimes Against Humanity Convention, because they believe that the ill treatment of women by the Taliban regime can amount to gender apartheid. We know that gender persecution especially discrimination against women, have been defined in so many international conventions, human rights conventions, but those conventions only define a discrimination which has been women have been experiencing for decades, but the term gender apartheid is more severe. Nowadays the way the Taliban are treating women is more than just discrimination against women. It is more than more than persecution, because they are kind of trying to dehumanize women. They have completely erased women from public life. So we cannot call it just persecution or discrimination against women. It is way severe than this discrimination. That is why we should call it gender apartheid, and it should be included in international treaties and conventions, so that we could hold the perpetrators accountable of their mistreatments of women, you know.
Yeah. And of course you came to Ireland not so long ago, having left Afghanistan, and we know that even in recent weeks it's become even more oppressive than what you might have left behind, what you might have witnessed. But just for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with the terms gender apartheid, which you so well explained there, what kind of examples are we seeing with women in Afghanistan who are really living under this complete restrictive life?
Since 2019, since the Taliban started meetings with the Afghanistan representatives and representatives from America, especially the special envoy from America, which was mandated on Afghanistan's issues. So they held so many meetings in Doha, Qatar. Since then, the Taliban promised that they had changed.
Yeah.
They are different to the Taliban of 1996. So the Taliban were kind of like they are going to have a softer approach towards women's rights. But unfortunately, when they seized power in Afghanistan in 2021, they broke all their promises.
Yeah.
They started, imposing more restrictions on women's rights and freedoms. They first banned schools, girls from going to school. Beyond grade 6, girls are not allowed, to go to school. And shortly they banned girls from going to universities. And like this, they banned women from their most basic rights.
Yeah.
Like even women are not allowed to go to public parks, gyms. They just recently, issued a new law called the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice. Under that law, they have even banned women's voices. Like women are not allowed to speak aloud in public.
Yeah.
Right now in Afghanistan. Like they are not allowed to travel on their own, so there should be always someone from their family to chaperone them, to accompany them, while they're going out. So now they have been completely banned, even from speaking aloud in public. So I think this is not just discrimination against women. This is very severe. And kind of systematic, because the Taliban have the intention, and they are doing it systematically. They are, and of course, it is the way they are treating women is inhuman. So we see that we have all the elements of apartheid, so that's why it should be called gender apartheid, because there is an intention. It is institutionalized, systematic, and of course inhuman. So, as I mentioned before, it is not just discrimination against women. I would say it is gender apartheid, and it should be codified in international law.
It should be, and we'll get to that and what that means a little bit later in terms of ratifying that and seeing how that can assist and support. I suppose looking at the same way that maybe matters came into effect after gender or after race apartheid was put into a treaty to deal with that in South Africa, and maybe looking at how systemically that will represent.
Well, of course, as we believe, as the United Nations experts believe that there is a parallel between the racial apartheid in South Africa and gender apartheid. It is just the differences that before it was people, the black people were discriminated against on the basis of their race. And now women in Afghanistan and even in other parts of the world are being, oppressed on the basis of their gender. So there is definitely a parallel between these two apartheids, and the way the international community supported the black people's fight in South Africa. So we urge the international community to also support, our fight, Afghan women's fight, and support us to get this term included in and recognized in international law, because they're quite similar,
Yeah, and as you say, things are getting more extreme. And just looking at Iran, I suppose, as well, and Mahya, thank you so much as well for coming to join us today. And I know you've been a really instrumental part of this campaign, and it's interesting to compare, I guess, the two, both extremely oppressive, and as you said, not discrimination, it's much more than that. It's a structural oppressive regime on women. What is the experience coming from Iran, and what maybe slightly different issues perhaps are women experiencing under the regime in Iran?
Well, I think Mahbooba explained this very well for Afghanistan. Iran is a similar case, but of course Afghanistan, like Taliban, is treating women much harsher and more violently. And in Iran, it's a bit softer form of gender apartheid, if you want to say. But still, in every aspect of life as a woman, you feel that you are second-class citizen, which I think is the whole point of why we're calling it apartheid or gender apartheid. And that's based on basically gender. So it's inside the legal system. So there are different laws banning women from different activities, from what you wear basically to who you want to marry, if you want to get divorced, after divorce, if you want to have your kids. So in basically every aspect of your life as a woman, you feel that you are second-class citizen. That's why basically we're calling on, as Mahbooba said very well, on international community to include the term gender apartheid, because we believe that we need a term first in international law to make these regimes responsible. Yeah. And at the same time, what we lack right now is a common collective narrative, like a common experience that we have in Iran and Afghanistan to different degrees, of course. We don't have a word for that to describe it. So that's why we need to sit here and explain different examples for the world to understand what's happening in Iran and Afghanistan. But when you talk about apartheid, I think everybody would somehow understand what we mean by it, or how severe and how serious that is as a crime against humanity. So that's why we are basically calling on for it. So it's part of it is international law, part of it is this collective narrative that we can describe what's happening to women in those two countries. And
just so that people get a real understanding, I mean, this is law. Both they're regimes. It's not a group of people who are perpetrating acts of violence or oppression on another group of people. It's not that. These are instrumental lawmakers who, one of the recent bills, I don't know whether it's been passed or what stage it's at in Iran, is the hijab and chastity bill. And you also mentioned then that there's the virtue, the Ministry of Virtue as well. So we're seeing these laws that are being made to really enshrine this oppressive regime in both countries. And I think this month marks the anniversary of the death of someone, I mean, as an example of somebody who, you know, suffered so violently at the hands of the morality police in Iran. And I don't think people know enough about this and how these laws are being implemented and monitored and policed in such a violent and cruel and degrading way. But it was Mahsa Amini. You might just tell us a little bit about her case so we've more of an insight.
Yeah, so as you said, these days are anniversary of Mahsa Jina Amini. So she was a 22-year-old woman who basically died in the hand of, as you said, morality police, as they call it themselves, but it's actually a hijab police. So there's nothing moral about it, what I mean. But they just call it that way because it makes it kind of positive. It has a positive connotation. But what they do is basically they arrest women on the street for the way that they dress. So if they feel that you are not wearing their kind of ideal hijab, they can arrest you. And it's very subjective too. For example, Mahsa, she had hijab. It's not that she wasn't wearing hijab. She had actually hijab, but it wasn't to their standard to some extent. And what I want to kind of highlight here is that Mahsa was not an exception. So women have been treated like this for more than 40 years now in Iran. So it has been a fight going on for more than 14 years between women and the Islamic Republic, the regime. And with Mahsa, only because it was an extreme case and because the photos of the girl on hospital bed went viral and everybody saw it, and afterwards this movement was created because of that woman. It got so much international attention.
Sure.
But it wasn't something that has happened only 2 years ago and it was an exception. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember. So I left Iran 2012 and I remember since like ever that these hijab police were on the street. And they really treat women violently if they want. If you resist basically the arrest, they can beat you up. And I remember this scene that I was a teenager and they were arresting, for example, 2 really young women, 2 teenagers on the street. And the women were screaming and trying to resist the arrest, and they were beating them up and pushing them in the cars that they have. And I remember that I heard one of her heads being, as they were pushing her into the car, her head was hit to the door of the car. So she could very well be Mahsa Amini. So
it was commonplace.
Yeah, it is commonplace. And after Mahsa Amini, although the whole world has seen what happened to Mahsa, and everybody was kind of outraged, since then we had 2 more cases that were in the media. So probably there were more, but we haven't heard about them. But there were 2 more cases. For example, last year, a 16-year-old girl, Armita Gravand, was killed in metro. She was a school year. She was going actually to school. She was taking a metro to go to school, and she was beaten up to death again for not wearing hijab, because right now women are resisting wearing hijab in Iran after Mahsa. And only a couple of months ago, another woman was shot in her car because she was driving without hijab in her own car, and she's paralyzed. So what I'm saying is that during only these 2 years, we have 3 cases of women, 2 of them killed and 1 of them paralyzed. So it's not an exception. That's why we are saying it's systematic, and it has been a long fight and difficult fight, and women are still resisting empty-handedly, very bravely. And we still haven't seen that much support and that much concrete actions from the international community.
Despite the fact that people are hearing what's happening, and we're not hearing the whole story. I mean, it's very difficult to get full testimonies, I'm sure. We'll come back to the testimonies of some of the women and your experience as well, Mahbooba, but just turning to you, Robbyn, in terms of picking up there on what Mahya said about international reaction. You have been working with various parties and different groups within Ireland, and I'm just looking at back in April of this year, 10 UN member states had expressed openness to exploring the codification of the crime of gender apartheid in the treaty that we spoke about. Now, Ireland has spoken up in favour of this decision, but as of now, it is yet to directly support the inclusion of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. What has your experience been in dealing with your campaign, I suppose, and getting support from the Irish government, and maybe in reference to other member states who are taking a similar position?
Sure. So the campaign, in many countries around the world, there are groups of women, volunteers just like us, who are working with their own governments to try to get that support, because 188 member states all need to be lobbied to move this treaty forward and then include gender apartheid as one of the enumerated crimes. Now, Ireland has not actually come forward and said they approve the inclusion of gender apartheid as a crime. What they have done is they have spoken forcefully for the convention. They want to see a Crimes Against Humanity treaty go forward, and they want that to happen. But what we are hearing from our contacts in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right up to the level of Minister Martin's office, is that they are concerned about not pushing for the inclusion of gender apartheid before they get to the negotiating stage of the treaty. They need enough member states to come on board and pass the idea of a treaty and get it to the negotiating stage before they can table that idea.
Okay.
And so we are concerned that this is being put into the long grass. We cannot let the idea of gender apartheid fall off the table. There are flaws in the treaty as it's going forward. There's no point in having a treaty that doesn't have teeth. This treaty needs to have teeth. It needs to have carefully enumerated and carefully thought out items that should be crimes, and it needs an enforcement mechanism and the will to enforce it.
And I suppose we're seeing the headlines. I mean, the headline that I woke up to this morning was one of the examples that you just mentioned, Mahbooba, about the voices. I think it was a BBC headline saying that the voices of Taliban are women. The Taliban have silenced women in Afghanistan. And so as you read that as a headline and you see the outrage that creates, but it's then frustrating to see that nothing really is happening around it. Well, not nothing, but as you said, we need this to remain on the table. On that, I mean, it's a bit of a weak response that we're seeing from leaders around the world. I'm wondering about leaders, though. Do you see a bit of a double standard sometimes when it comes to some of the countries who will call out this type of oppressive regime against women, but they're also enforcing their own rules? France is one country that I'm thinking about in terms of monitoring what women are wearing and policing what women are wearing. And we can see some EU countries really becoming a little bit more rigid around expression, and that's causing a little bit of, I'm just thinking in particular of women who choose to be veiled and to go, so France is one of the examples. Is there anything that you're seeing?
Well, to be fair, we are so disappointed on the international community because we see that Afghan women have been left in limbo. They are completely abandoned by the international community, like they have done nothing so far. Only the thing that they are doing is just they are somehow condemning, the Taliban's treatment of women, and just making statements, raising points, which has done nothing. I mean, it has not changed, the situation of women in Afghanistan.
No.
And we see that after 3 years, the situation of the appalling situation of women continue to deteriorate. I mean, they are still fighting for their most basic rights. And we see that there was a meeting in Doha about Afghanistan a few months ago. On that meeting, women from Afghanistan were meant to be there at the meeting, but because the Taliban asked the international community or UN members, not to include women on the agenda, so it is so sad that the Taliban were hurt. I mean, the United Nations was kind of trying, to be abide by what the Taliban are ordering or saying.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the representatives from the civil society, from women, they were all excluded from the agenda, and the meeting went on, were held without women. And then there was another, step back, which again, last month the Taliban, declared that Richard Bennett, who was mandated as a special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, so the Taliban banned him from entering Kabul, Afghanistan. And he is not able, anymore to do the investigation on the human rights or the situation of women in Afghanistan. This is also something that the international community did nothing.
Yeah.
So it is something like that emboldening, the Taliban and
it is emboldening, and really it's women who are leading this around the world. This global campaign is being led by women, and what worries me about what you just said is how we are going to get the testimony from women, and how if they're banning people from entering as well. I mean, it's difficult, is it, to get
obviously. So like the way the international community is supporting the Taliban, it has given a lot of courage, to the Taliban, and unfortunately we see some of our neighboring countries even trying to have relationships, with the Taliban, and some countries are having a very soft approach, towards the recognition of, the Taliban, which is very sad, and like how they are letting this happen, to women, and unfortunately a lot of these countries are claiming that we are supporting, human rights and. Women's rights matter to us, but unfortunately, in practice, practically, they have done nothing so far for women of Afghanistan.
Yeah,
and
there's double standards at play. I'm just thinking about the women who are trailblazers and who are defying these, oppressive regimes to come out and speak, and they're really endangering their life. Their life is at risk pretty much every day.
Well,
we're seeing this online, and the footage that we're seeing shows this. And even from your perspective, Iran, there was a huge movement over the last number of years of women who defied the regime there. Do you think it's important that, it's hard to say that, but is this a way to share what's happening, and how have you responded to some of the footage that we've seen from women in both Afghanistan and
yeah, of course. For example, in the case of Iran, what we see and what we have seen, as I said, for 40 years, it's easier to see it now because of social media and because everybody has a mobile phone to take a video, take a photo of what's happening, and that's why we're seeing it. It's not that it wasn't happening before. It was that we didn't have this kind of tools to help us to bring it to the world. So as you said, there are many, and before even Mahsa's movement, there have been videos showing women, and it's a process, it's a fight. So you can see, for example, that there were campaigns before against the compulsory hijab, and women sending their photos, their videos of walking unveiled, for example, in the street. Although they knew that they could be arrested, they could be killed like Mahsa Amini, they could be treated that violently. So we see those kind of videos every day. And for example, during the movement that happened 2 years ago in Iran, there were some acts that were so brave that I couldn't believe that women had the courage to do it. So it was a movement that was very well women-led.
Yeah.
It was one of the I would say, one of the first feminist movements in that region. And I'm really proud of it, and that's why I kind of want to highlight it. And then, so we saw, like, I remember myself during, I think it was the first month, that there was this video from north of Iran that people were gathering around a small fire. They were set a small fire, and then they were dancing around it, and they were kind of burning their headscarves in it, which is such a brave act to do in Iran. And I couldn't believe that I can see it on footage, that people actually are doing this, because for me it was a dream coming true, seriously. And there are really some forms of defiance and resistance that I can't imagine if I was, for example, right now in Iran, would I have the courage to do it or not?
Yeah. It must be difficult to see, and try and kind of contemplate, because it is brave and it is very defiant.
It's when you think about the bravery that both Mahbooba and Mahya are articulating about their fellow countrymen, that they are exhibiting, it's a stark contrast to what we see as a frustrating and pusillanimous response from the international community. As Mahbooba has pointed out, the international community engaging with the Taliban in international negotiations in which women are excluded. Our own president sending a run-of-the-mill letter of congratulations to the newly elected quote-unquote reformist president of Iran that did not take into account what the regime is currently doing against women. These kinds of normalized relations with those two regimes are not acceptable, and they are not going to move the case for women and girls, women and children of the female persuasion. They are not going to save their lives, which is what we're talking about here. We're talking actually about extinguishing the lives, livelihoods, futures of a whole generation of young Iranian and Afghan women who will be coming up in the future without any of the rights that the women in this room enjoy.
And I suppose on that we do enjoy those rights, and we're watching from afar and lending our support as much as we can, the best way that we can. But as you said, we need action, and we need people to take this seriously. And you've highlighted issues there that I really wasn't aware of, and I'm quite astonished, to be honest, to hear some of those examples of the lack of leadership, to be perfectly honest. But Robbyn, I suppose for everybody, if this goes ahead, and if we get to see gender apartheid codified in international law as a crime, how does that impact, firstly, the women that we've spoken about in Iran and Afghanistan, but how does it benefit us at large, women and girls around the world? Surely, there's a narrative there to feed into that we need this level of protection and this recognition globally. How does this benefit everybody?
Well, I believe if this term gender apartheid, gets included and codified in international law, it is not only a tool that will make the Taliban accountable for their atrocities, it is also helpful for all the countries, especially for women who are being, treated the same way in other parts of the world. So it is going to be a legal standard, kind of way to hold, the perpetrators accountable of what they are doing to women. It's very important. So all we are fighting, trying, to get this term included. So we really hope that someday this will get included, so that not only the oppressive regime of the Taliban and Iran, but wherever there is an oppressive regime where they're trying, to limit the rights of women, the rights and freedoms of women, will be, accountable for their acts.
Sure. Yeah, it's crucial, isn't it? And hopefully it'll be done in a timely manner, because it is, there's a sense of urgency around this, particularly when you see how, even in the last number of weeks as we sit here, it's become more extreme. The violence has become more extreme. And as you said, we're not seeing all of it. We're not seeing the full extent of it in the reports, which is very, very worrying. But maybe from your perspective then, Mahya, what way would you see this impacting women and girls in a positive way if this came into force?
For Iran, and I think also for Afghanistan, what is important, is because especially in case of Iran, that they have been in power right now for more than 40 years, and they have kind of normal diplomatic relationship with different countries, including Europe. It's part of delegitimizing the government, the regime, because what we have seen multiple times during these 40 years, that people take to street, risking their lives to just show the world that we don't want this regime, and we don't see it as our legitimate government. What Iranians did 2 years ago was just to show the world that, okay, we don't want this regime. It's not easy to do the revolution, of course. It takes time. It's a process. But for the Islamic Republic and for the Taliban in the world to lose their legitimacy, because as Mahbooba said, like the Islamic Republic exactly went the same way for more than 40 years ago. They were successful in saying that this is our culture, this is our religion. If we treat women as second-class citizens because this is our culture, you Western people don't know about it, it's none of your business, it's our country, and we have the right to treat women like that. And the Islamic Republic, especially after 40 some years, they were successful in normalizing this narrative.
Sure.
So what the term gender apartheid would help us to do is to take this kind of legitimacy and normalization of how they treat women from them. That this is not normal, this is apartheid actually. And it has happened before in the history, although it wasn't gender apartheid, it was racial apartheid.
Sure.
And for example, right now, it's so difficult it has been so difficult for Iranians to argue, okay, for example, we don't recognize the Islamic Republic, and the Islamic Republic should be boycotted in different aspects. For example, in sports competition, international sports competition, which has happened, for example, right now to Russia, we see, which happened before to South Africa. Why shouldn't it happen to the Islamic Republic? And this is not something that because we are talking about international law, but for example, for 2022 protests in Iran, there was actually a UN's fact-finding mission that was, I think, they investigated more than 1 year what has happened 2 years ago. And they actually announced that, okay, there were cases of crimes against humanity with the list of what has happened. So we actually know that the Islamic Republic has committed crimes against humanity. But what are we doing in response to that?
I think I agree with Mahya because I have heard from a lot of people saying that, this is your culture, so we can't do anything, to change like a country's culture. But I would say this is the matter of human rights.
Absolutely.
No violation of human rights should justify, a culture or say a religion. Especially in the case of Afghanistan, there are 4 major ethnic communities in Afghanistan, which is predominantly Pashtuns, and I would say this culture could belong to the Pashtun community, but I myself belong to the Hazara community, which are completely different to the Pashtun community. And what the Taliban are trying to impose by the name of religion on women and girls, that is not my culture. Yeah. It could be the culture of Pashtun people. Sure. And I don't belong to that community, and not even my community. Like there are Tajiks, Uzbeks, who are also different to Pashtuns, and they don't want that culture, They don't, especially Hazaras. Hazaras are the most educated and peace-loving people in Afghanistan. So we definitely don't agree. We don't accept those restrictive laws that Taliban are trying to impose on women by the name of religion. And really definitely it is the matter of human rights. So we urge all the international community to support us, to stop the Taliban from breaching these laws, from violating this international policies, norms, and standards. They are all human rights principles that every state is responsible to respect and those rights, and they should not be disregarded. So I'd say
you've described it so well, and it is, I think...
Can I add something here? Because I think
sure, please
this is really important, what Mahbooba said, and she said it perfectly. Because I think even if it was culture, even if, imagine that, okay, it's true, it's Iranian culture, okay? I'm not saying it is, but imagine that if it was. Racism was culture too. Racism was legal too. Does it mean that we shouldn't fight it? We shouldn't fight for equality. Some values are, as Mahbooba said, this is a matter of human rights. Some values are universal. Nobody should get a free ticket for sexism, for treating women like that, even if it's in another part of the world that we don't know about.
Anything about, yeah. Of course. So really, what we've looked at today, and I think a big distinction is that people might see it as a form of discrimination and a form of oppression, which really we've delved into a lot deeper here, that it's really a form of dehumanization and an attempt to erase women from life. And I can't imagine a society where everybody's not impacted by that, men and women alike. It's not possible to dissect society like that and have a normal functioning society. So it's looking at that in a sense that, it's a real, I heard someone describe it as spirit murder. It's really, really, that's how painful it is to a woman who is surviving this and going through this form of oppression. And I can see into that. But going forward, and thank you both as well for describing, kind of your insights into it and the experience and the testimonies that you're witnessing in your own countries and globally. But going forward, Robbyn, what can listeners do? How can people help all of you within your organisation and wherever they are? Because we've listeners outside of this country who will be involved in or listen to this and maybe want to find out how they can do more. What action can we take and what are the key issues that we need to focus on?
Well, very simply, they can Google the phrase gender apartheid and see what it means and use the phrase. Use it in relation to the Taliban. Use it in relation to the regime in Iran. Talk to their friends. This is the weight of international opinion does move mountains sometimes, but it takes a lot of effort. We saw that with the apartheid regime in South Africa. Yeah. The bans, the boycotts, the weight of humanity made that change possible. And it's possible here too, but we need that collective effort. The kinds of things we've been talking about today, they would not be possible if we were using the word race or religion instead of women, instead of gender. The world would not accept it. It's not acceptable for women either. So if listeners want to get in touch with our campaign, I know you've said you'd put up an address to get to us, a link. But also write to your representatives, write to your political parties in whatever country you're in. Weigh in, speak up. Follow the various hashtags about this on your social media. Hashtag United Against Gender Apartheid. Hashtag End Gender Apartheid. It's very simple. Share the words of these women. You will see testimonies. You were talking earlier about testimonies. The United Against Gender Apartheid hashtag endlessly puts up short videos of the testimony of young women in Iran and Afghanistan who are bravely talking about their personal experiences. Share them. Share them loudly. Don't let the world forget that women are going through this in these two countries, but it could be in your country. It could be anywhere. And if we don't speak up, it really could be anywhere.
Well, this is a vital campaign, and I'm so glad to have had the opportunity to share this today. And we'll keep on top of this as well. It's something I'm particularly interested in. And you all volunteer your time to do this. And I mean, the more help you can get, the better. And I would really encourage listeners and anybody interested in this to really look up, as Robbyn suggested, follow that advice. From the very basic thing, find out more about it, talk about it, normalise this language. It's so important. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming today and joining me here. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to speak to you.
Likewise.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service, where our team using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.